The Roman Empire, could it have survived the test of time? If you want a simple answer, then the answer is yes. Just a few years back, before the dire end of the Roman Empire in 476, one man was on the verge to restore the glory of the Roman Empire. This man was the last great emperor, described as Redeemer, Reformer, Restorer. His name was Julius Valerius Maiorianus, otherwise known as Majorian. He was born into the Roman Empire in a time of unprecedented crisis. By the 5th century AD, Rome was on its deathbed, tormented by civil wars, hyperinflation, barbarian invasion, and a shrinking Roman population. And this is the story of how it happened. Majorian was born around the year 420. The place where he was born is unknown and lost to history. His family was of aristocratic Roman heritage and wealthy landowners with military traditions. He is described by the historians as having fine hair, and as much like as the population of Rome in the 5th century, he was a Christian. He was named after his notable grandfather, who was a Magister Militum under the Emperor Theodosius I. The Magister Militum, or in English, Master of Soldiers, was a top-level military command used in the late stage of the Roman Empire, basically meaning a general in command of a field army. His father was the administrator of finances, serving under the Magister Militum Flavius Aetius, one of the most powerful men of the Western Roman Empire. Also, under the command of Aetius, Majorian started his military career. He went with his troops to Gallia, where he met two officers who were to play an important role in Majorian's life: the Suevic Visigoths, Ricimer, and the Gallo-Roman Aegidius. Majorian's career began to flourish with many successes, like the defense of the city of Touraneses, nowadays Tours, in France, or the battles against the Franks between the year 447 and 448. These military triumphs brought the attention of the Emperor Valentinian III, who wanted to marry his daughter Placidia to Majorian. The emperor had no male heirs and wanted to have a son-in-law that he could trust to be the next in line to be the new emperor. Majorian was a brilliant general, popular, and more importantly for the emperor, he was a pure Roman blood. And with this, avoid the possibility that barbarian generals who did not share Roman culture and ideals took too much power over the empire. But Aetius, Majorian commander, a half Roman, half barbarian general, had a plan on his own. He wanted his own son to marry Placidia, so he put an end to the military career of Majorian. The emperor could not do anything about it as he was obliged by contracts to Aetius. Majorian was expelled from Aetius' staff and sent to his country state. In the same year, the emperor killed Aetius with his own hands. The execution of Aetius was quite a political shock and brought some instability to the government of Valentinian. And by being afraid of the revenge of Aetius' loyal soldiers, the emperor called Majorian back to service. And in the year 454, Majorian was able to return to public life. But just 1 year after that, two former soldiers of Aetius assassinated the Emperor Valentinian III. The competition for the throne started, and Majorian played the main role as candidate. But in the end, Majorian was not corrupt enough to bribe his way into the throne. So, a senator who was involved in the murder of the Emperor Valentinian, called Petronius Maximus, became the new emperor. He outmaneuvered the other candidates, and to strengthen his position, he forced Valentinian's widow, Licina Eudoxia, to marry him. And he also promoted Majorian to the rank of commander-in-chief of the Imperial Guard, to somewhat show to the people that Majorian was on his side. But his ruling wasn't meant to last. He was murdered just a few weeks later during the Vandal sack of Rome in May 455. The Western Roman Empire was weak and in chaos. And even then, Majorian did not take the throne. A memorable quote of Plato says, "Only those who do not seek power are qualified to hold it." Avitus, a Gallic Roman nobleman, made his way into the throne. He had a great support of the Visigoths, a Germanic barbarian people which sometimes served as an ally to the Roman Empire, and in hopes to restore the order, Majorian and his friend Ricimer both gave their support to the new emperor. But again, this emperor time in office was not meant to last. Avitus decided to distribute key positions into the empire for his fellow Gallo-Roman friends, which sparked an anti-Gallo-Roman sentiment, and he started to lose the loyalty of the Italian aristocracy. With this, Majorian and Ricimer revolted against the corrupted emperor, and Ricimer convinced the Senate to depose him. The Senate accepted and also ordered the murder of his general Remistus. And Avitus, once discovered the news, decided to fight back. But Ricimer was ready and defeated the troops of Avitus in Placentia, imprisoned the emperor and forced him to resign. And in the end, Avitus probably died by starvation in 457. The West was left with no emperor. This situation was used by the Alemanni, another Germanic barbarian tribe, who sent a horde of 900 men to invade Italy, but they were stopped by troops sent by Majorian. This victory was celebrated as Majorian's victory, even he wasn't personally there. The victory was so overwhelming that the army declared Majorian as the emperor. This happened on the year of 457, in the 1st of April, on the same date that this very channel was created 15 centuries later. But Ricimer was another candidate to the throne, and he had more victories and power overall. Ricimer had a barbarian origin, so in the view of many of the Roman aristocracy and the people, he was not fit for the throne. But as Ricimer had control of the Roman army and had a good relationship with Majorian, since they both were serving under Aetius, Ricimer agreed with the nomination of Majorian as emperor, even although he was probably not happy with it. At the time, the Roman Empire was split into West and East, and the emperor ruling the East was the Emperor Leo I, who did not recognize Majorian as the emperor of the West. Leo did not follow protocol and named a co-emperor, maybe because he wanted to rule the empire as a whole. Nevertheless, this set a dangerous precedent for the West without an emperor, and on December 28, 457, Majorian was officially declared the emperor, but apparently never obtained recognition from the East court. At first, Majorian was intended to be a puppet emperor, with the real power being in the hands of Ricimer. This already had happened before, around 50 years earlier, when the Western Roman Empire was ruled by the Emperor Honorius. He was a Roman, but who was in control was Flavius Stilicho, a military commander of barbarian origin. But the story was not meant to repeat itself. Majorian was a capable leader and would not be a puppet. But now finally, Majorian was the emperor, and he had a few pressing matters on his hand. The Western Empire was fragmented and several provinces were lost. After a series of ineffective emperors who did nothing to address the dire situation or did not stay in power for long enough to do anything, the first problem that Majorian had to address was the consolidation of his rule over the province of Italy. Italy had been invaded several times in the previous years and Rome sacked. Any emperor who wanted to have the approval of the people would need to prove capable of protecting the heart of the motherland. And with a Vandal invasion shortly after, Majorian had the chance to prove himself. And he did it, with a major victory over the Vandals in 457, this time with an army led by him personally, which cemented his strength, popularity and influence, allowing him to escape from any of Ricimer's attempts to control him. Majorian was finally, truly the emperor, and the Roman people cherished the new emperor. It was like, for a moment, that the Golden Age was back, the times of Caesar, Augustus, Trajan, and Marcus Aurelius were back. But the Roman Empire was not saved yet. If Majorian wanted to be among the greatest and give a future to the Roman people, he would need to do much more. But he was willing to do it, no matter the cost. His second major problem was the recovery of the province of Gaul after the rebellion that took place there because of the deposition of the previous emperor. He also planned to take back the province of Hispania and Africa, but this would have to wait for later. The Western Empire in Majorian times had only control of the provinces of Italy and the northern part of the province of Gaul. Using his army, the new emperor invaded Gaul and in 458 defeated the Burgundians in another major victory. The Burgundians were a barbaric Germanic people who invaded the area where is nowadays Switzerland and southern France. After his victory, he departed to Hispania, to the Visigoth domain. The desolated, occupied Roman lands of Hispania in the Iberian Peninsula were in a bad shape in the hands of the barbarians. But the people living there were Romans, and they were waiting for the emperor to come back and bring order to these lands. The Visigoths were a group of Germanic barbarians who invaded the Roman territory and sacked the city of Rome itself in 410. And also, they happened to be the same people who were the ancestors of Majorian's friend and general, Ricimer. But none of this would intimidate Majorian. He was determined to restore the glory of the Roman people, and the people and his army were with him. And after massive victories, the barbarian tribes were forced to leave much of the territories as part of humiliating peace deals, as well as their minor independent areas became Roman vassal states. The rest of the Iberian Peninsula was conquered in 459. Now, the Western Roman Empire had control of Hispania, Gaul, and Italy. But that was just the beginning. Majorian dreamed of restoring the empire to its former self, and he wanted to retake North Africa, a rich region that was once the bread and basket of the Western Roman Empire. The emperor began preparation by assembling an enormous fleet to reconquer Africa from another Germanic barbarians called the Vandals. But once the Vandals heard about his plans and they knew about his victories, they got scared and started to destroy and vandalize the Roman lands under their control to deny Majorian of the resources to sustain the reconquest. However, his reconquest of Africa was not meant to be. The Vandals, who panicked about the attack, decided to offer big sums of money to any Roman interested in betraying Majorian. It was difficult, but they found their Judas. And in 460, while the ships were preparing to set sail to Africa, a fire broke out, started by the traitors who took money from the Vandals. His fleet was burnt, and his dream of a recovered Rome shattered. Majorian was forced to sign a peace treaty with the Vandals, and his plan of reconquests were over. He decided then to march back to Italy. In the meantime, dissatisfaction grew in the Senate, fueled by Ricimer, who was afraid that Majorian would become too strong to control. New reforms were introduced by Majorian, including monetary and legal reforms, but also new policies to increase childbirth rates among the Romans. He also forbade women below 40 to enter in the clergy, as well as lower wedding dowries, to make marriages more financially attractive. In other words, he was desperate to grow the Roman population. Against huge waves of barbarian migrants who did not share the same Roman culture. As he probably could foresee, this could lead to the end of the Roman way of life and the empire itself. These reforms were proving unpopular among the senatorial aristocracy and the higher classes, as they felt that the reforms would have a bad impact on their private interests, as workers with big families would need to be paid more in order to sustain their families. You see, at this time, the Roman aristocracy ran massive tenant farm plantations. growing olives, grapes, wheat, and various other crops that required thousands of workers to cultivate. The high amount of cheap labor competition coming from the barbarian homeland kept the native Roman workers paid low, and the slaves were not such a viable option anymore, since the empire stopped its expansion centuries earlier. As a result, the Roman income gap became huge between the hundreds of rich landlords throughout the countryside and the poor tenant farmers that worked on the fields. The elite of Rome has such a great financial power to enforce this, that they were able to forbid the emperors from recruiting people from the Italian provinces, as they would cut into their profits. This essentially dismantled most of the Roman army. So the Roman emperors were forced to recruit barbarian migrants to fight their wars. But these barbarian warriors were disloyal and they had no connection to the Roman culture, as they were poorly disciplined. As a result, the Roman military, which was once considered the most disciplined, well-trained and efficient army in the world, became notoriously unreliable. All these factors combined, and the fact that Majorian did not have enough time to course-correct the current trend. In the end, this just meant that the dream of Majorian of have the glory of Rome restored was just a dream. The disloyalty and treachery of the barbarian troops that are now in between coats protecting the Italian province will take the story of Majorian into a major downward spiral. The emperor was on his way to Rome, probably to appeal to the Roman people to gather more Roman troops to defeat the barbarian threats, when he was betrayed and captured by the despicable Ricimer, somebody that once he called friend. Ricimer was consumed by jealousy and despise for the Roman people and its corrupted aristocracy. He had tried to be a Roman, and as he was not fully accepted, now he wanted to destroy everything that Rome stands for. He sent Majorian to a prison where he was stripped of his imperial clothes and ornaments, and he was beaten and tortured. And after 5 days of being tortured, the Emperor Majorian was beheaded near the river Iria on the 7th of August of 461. He was 40 years old and ruled for 4 years. With the news of his death, the Roman people lost any hope and the empire became just a shadow of its former self. And after Majorian's death, Ricimer took control of the empire. And he waited 3 months with the empire with no emperor. And Ricimer would put a series of his own puppet emperors. But the writing was on the wall. The Western Roman Empire was no more. With the death of Majorian, all hope was gone. Ricimer would die a few years later, and Odoacer, another barbarian warlord, would put a final nail in the coffin of the Roman Empire. He would depose the last puppet emperor and send a letter to the Eastern Empire that the West does not need an emperor anymore. This was 476, the end of Rome. Although the time Majorian had on the throne was very short, he was very much capable of retaking the Roman Empire, showing that the empire and the Romans were very much alive until the very end. What would the future be like if he was never betrayed by Ricimer or the greed of the senatorial aristocracy? Despite his short rule, he definitely deserves a place among the great emperors. In the end, his other trusted friend, Aegidius, from the time he served together with Ricimer under Aetius, deserted the empire after the death of Majorian and went to North Gaul, where he formed the kingdom of the Suessan, in order to keep the Roman way of life alive. His kingdom survived the end of the Western Roman Empire in 476, but unfortunately fell under another barbarians, the Franks, 10 years later. But the Franks would adapt and merge with the local Romans and eventually would form the country of France, one of the oldest countries in Europe. Majorian's story and achievements will not be forgotten as long as the legacy of Rome is still alive in all the countries that formed in the aftermath of its downfall and later. If you like to hear stories of the past and archaeological news, stay with us by subscribing to our channel. And to be notified about our upcoming videos, hit the bell icon. It is amazing that we can know so much about the empire and the people who lived there thousands of years ago. That there is always something new to discover. And if you want to know more about the Roman Empire, click on the video appearing on the screen. Thank you for watching. Tibi gratis agu, pro vigilabo.